It's always encouraging to see our last leaders, young men, doing such a good job and everything. So, if you will, open your Bibles to Matthew chapter 16. Matthew 15, that is. Matthew chapter 15. We are going through the book of Matthew, and we are pretty much on track. We're going to have to pick up the pace just a little bit, and we should be able to do that in the next few chapters. We have Trevor Smoot coming in about a month, and so we're going to have to pick up how fast we've been going. We've been able to go verse by verse, and I believe we'll be able to continue doing that. Just going to have to go a little bit quicker. So today we're going to be starting with chapter 15. Let's jump right in. Verses 1 through 9, Jesus is going to be dealing with traditions and commandments. And then the scribes and the Pharisees who were from Jerusalem came to Jesus saying, "Why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat bread." And he answered and said to them, "Why do you also transgress the commandments of God because of your tradition? For God commanded, saying, Honor your father and your mother, and he who curses father and mother, let him be put to death. But you say, whoever says to his father or mother, whatever profit you might have received from me is a gift to God, then he need not honor his father or mother. Thus you have made the commandment of God of no effect by your tradition. Hypocrites! Well did Isaiah prophesy about you, saying, These people draw near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me, and in vain they worship me, teaching as doctrine the commandments of men." It's a very important passage that we have here. First, we have the scribes and the Pharisees. These are some of the most powerful men in the Jewish society. So they're in Jerusalem, all throughout Israel. The scribes and the Pharisees are known as lawyers. They're the ones who teach the Bible. They know the Bible, and so people consider them lawyers. The Pharisees were a sect of the Jews that had a lot of teachings and doctrines that they taught and expected the people to follow. They were considered very religious. But they say to Jesus, why do your disciples transgress the tradition of our fathers? They do not wash their hands. So we're dealing with one particular thing about, apparently the disciples did something where they didn't wash the way that they thought they should. You need to understand that this is still a big issue with the Jews. In fact, in what they have is called the Mishnah. The Mishnah is another book that they have. It's rabbinical teachings. So they have the Bible, the Old Testament, but they also have a book, several different books, but one's called the Mishnah, and there's a whole section in there just on hand washing. And if you go to the Western Wall today, where the Jews come to pray, it's interesting. There are these fountains, and in those fountains are these little jars, these little brass-looking jars that they will put water in, and that is so that they can, with their hand, turn on the water spigot, which would be dirty and undefile them. They can then wash their hands by using this pitcher, this jar that they have there. So they're very meticulous about how they wash their hands. So notice this word here, tradition. This is something that they believed needed to be done, and they're not washing their hands. And Jesus answers and says, "Why do you transgress the commandment of God with your tradition?" In other words, they were making their tradition, what they thought that everyone should be doing who is a God follower, a God believer, they thought it was on equal ground with God's commandments. And Jesus has a word for them. He calls them a certain word. What is that word? Hypocrite, all right? Hypocrite. What's a hypocrite? How do you understand the word hypocrite?
One that claims to be a Christian, but he walks the other way.
Okay, so in the case of a Christian, one who claims to be a Christian but then walks a totally different way. What else? How else would you describe? Ooh, an actor. That's literally what the word means, an actor. They're putting on a show. They're showing that they are religious, but in reality they aren't. Now, Jesus doesn't just say hypocrite. He goes on to explain how they're a hypocrite. So whenever he says the commandment of God, he gives them an example. For example, you are to honor your father and your mother. That's in Exodus chapter 20. That's in the 10 commandments. And you go on into Leviticus and Numbers, Deuteronomy, where it explains if they break that command, a child, this one who does not honor their father and mother, can be put to death. Capital punishment. He says, however, you folks, talking about the scribes and Pharisees, you figured out a little loophole, or you have created a loophole. And that loophole is, as you read right there when it says, but you say, whoever says to his father and mother, whatever profit you might have received from me. So in other words, as still under the household of the father. You got to understand the way their society is set up. Americans are really different, okay? So Americans, once we turn 18 years old, we're considered an adult, and most Americans, they'll leave the house and they're their own person, and no longer do mother and father have any rights over the child. Am I correct? I'm saying all that? That's how we operate? Okay, that's not how it was in Jewish society. In Jewish society, the father remains the patriarch until the father dies. So it doesn't matter if the father is 100 years old and that child is 75 years old. He's still under the father. Go back and think about Abraham and Isaac and all of them, remember? And you see that over and over. And that's still part of society today, by the way. Even in Paraguay, children do not leave the house at 18 years old. They don't leave the house until they're like 25 or 26. Wouldn't that be something, parents? I just saw Jared go, ooh, no. Well, they don't leave it today, but for a different reason, right? So, whenever that says, you say to your mother and father, what profit you might have received from me. So, being under the patriarch, the father, the patriarch has the right to receive profit that comes from their children. But the scribes and Pharisees have figured out a little loophole, and that is, they call it raka. Okay, if you have King James Version, it says raka. In the New King James and others, it says a gift to God. So if, for example, I have some property that I have gained and I don't want my mother and father to have that property, all I need to do is say, oh, it's a gift of God. I'm going to give it to God. It's a gift of God. Now, I'm going to hold on to the property until such time that I'm going to give it to God. But as of right now, it's designated, it's earmarked as a gift to God. Therefore, you have no right to it. Isn't that sad? But that's what they were doing. So that's a tradition that is blatantly wrong, and apparently everybody knew it was wrong. And so that's why he brings it up. And then he explains, here's the problem though. It's not so much the fact that you're trying to defraud your parents or you're trying to make this tradition of this loophole, but here's the real problem. Remember what it said? Honor your father and your mother. Now, what are we as children supposed to do to our mothers and our fathers as we are being raised in their house? Obey, right? So what is honor?
Honor is changing their diapers when they're old and feeble.
Okay. Well, even as a child, what is honoring your parents? Huh? It's going beyond obedience, is it not? I mean, I can obey my mother and father as a child, but that don't mean I'll have to like it or my attitude shows it or anything else, or I'm going to do anything extra, right? So honoring mother and father not only shows obedience, but goes beyond that. It shows love. It shows respect. It shows relationship. It shows connection there. And therein lies the problem. They don't honor their mother and father. Why? Here's the reason. You people draw near with me with your mouth. But what's the problem? Your heart. Your heart is far from me. This right here, this is the key to the whole teaching of Jesus. The Sermon on the Mount, the whole sermon is about the heart. Every time he gets into an argument with the scribes and the Pharisees, it always comes back to the heart. They don't have the right kind of heart. So they honor God, they honor Jesus with their mouth, with their lips, but their heart is not there. Here's a question. Can we do that same thing in Christianity? Yeah. You can sit right here in these pews and you can sing the songs, you can bow your head, you can drop money in the plate, but your heart could be far from here. You could be thinking about, I would much rather be doing this or much rather be doing that, or what you really are, you're only doing, you're just going through the motions. Well, they weren't just going through the motions. That wasn't the only thing they were doing, but then they were adding things to the law, trying to make it so that they didn't have to do certain things or that they could do certain things. Like, for example, not sharing in their property with their mother and father. So, basically what he's saying, oh, you want to talk to me about hand washing? Seriously? He said, how about your mother and father issue? You don't even get that right. Why should we then, therefore, follow you? So, this is a crucial aspect and component missing from their faith. Their heart was not connected. They were not willing or did not have that loving disposition of obeying God and showing that love to Him. Any thoughts, comments on this section?
Jeremiah talked about it.
What did Jeremiah say about them?
Chapter 14, 11 through, verses 11 through 16. He said, Then said the Lord unto them, Pray not for the people for their good. When they fast, I will not hear their cry. When they offer burnt offerings and an oblation, I will not accept them. But I will consume them by the sword and by famine and by the pestilence.
There you go. So, just as us sitting in the pews, if our heart's not engaged in worship, if we don't honor God with our actions and our love, then we can expect the same outcome as what Jeremiah said, that mankind hasn't changed in 6,000 years. All right, so he goes on, he says, when he had called the multitude to himself. So now he's been talking to the scribes and the Pharisees. Now he turns and he looks at the multitude and he says, hear and understand. It's not what goes in the mouth that defiles a man, but what comes out of the mouth that defiles a man. Now he's going to go into this in other passages, especially back in the Sermon on the Mount. But you think about it, when you're talking about spiritual things, when you're talking about the soul of an individual, which is all that Jesus is concerned about, really. Quick question. Can you get sick by not washing your hands and putting something in your mouth? You can. But does that change the eternal destiny of your soul? There's the lesson, right? That's what he's trying to say. While yes, you need to wash your hands, please wash your hands, that's not what matters. That's not what defiles a man. Yes, it might make him sick, but Jesus is saying, I'm concerned about spiritual things. I'm concerned about your soul. Your heart's not right with God. And if I get sick by not washing my hands, that has nothing to do with my heart. You can still have an evil heart and have perfectly clean hands. Everybody follow me? Okay. So then the disciples came to him and said, do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard that saying? That's interesting. His own disciples come to him and say that. Now, what do his disciples know about Jesus? Know about him? They know that, well, as we're going to see in a little bit, they claim he is the Son of God. They've seen the miracles. They've heard the teaching. And so why are they concerned about the Pharisees being offended? Why do you think they're concerned about the Pharisees being offended? Yes. They had respect for them because they were spiritual leaders, okay?
Well, it's the same today. Don't say nothing to them, you'll offend them.
Okay.
Don't say nothing, don't speak to that.
Okay.
You'll offend them.
Don't say nothing.
You'll never obey the God.
I think they were probably afraid for Jesus
There you go. I think you're all correct, but one of the key things here, and you're going to see that in a little bit, is they were afraid of what these Pharisees. They know these are powerful men. So what happens whenever you start poking a bear? Right? That's what they're saying. Jesus, you're poking the bear. You need to be careful. These guys, they're not joke. They don't joke around. All right. So he says and answered, every plant which my heavenly Father has not planted will be uprooted. Let them alone. They are blind leaders of the blind, and if the blind leads the blind, both will fall in a ditch. He is talking about their doctrine. He is talking about what they are, what they're doing. He's saying, God's got this under control. God is always in control, and God will root this out. God will make everything right. Still talking about the hand washing and everything else, but we need not obsess over false teachers. We need to be mainly focused on evangelism. This is another problem in the church today. There are some people who focus more on false teachers and calling everybody out and everything else than evangelizing. And you know what a trend is that I'm seeing of those type of individuals, those type of churches that focus so much on calling out false teachers and trying to make sure the whole brotherhood knows about these false teachers? You know the trend I'm seeing? They're dwindling. Their congregations are dying. They turn people away because they're so inwardly focused. They're so concerned about false teachers. Now, should we be concerned about false teachers? Absolutely. But there's a certain way of dealing with it. You don't obsess with it. The most important thing for a disciple is evangelism, telling others about Jesus. That's what that point is right there. Then Peter answered and said, well, explain that to us. He's not following. Jesus said, are you also still without understanding? Do you not yet understand that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and is eliminated, but those things which proceed out of the mouth come from the heart? See, there it is. It's the heart. That's what defiles a man. From out of the heart proceed evil thoughts and murders and adulteries, fornications, theft, false witness, blasphemies. These are the things which defile a man, but to eat with unwashed hands does not defile a man. Everything I just said to you a minute ago. It's about the heart. It's about what's inside. That's what Jesus is most concerned about. He's not concerned about the dirt that's on your hands. It all has to do with what's coming out. He's trying to change behavior. He's trying to change mindset. He's trying to get people to focus on spiritual, including his own disciples, whom you're going to see over the next several verses that they struggle with this. They're trying to put all this together. Now something remarkable happens in the next section. You see here verses 21 through 28 is the faith of a Canaanite woman. So Jesus went out from there and departed to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a woman of Canaan came from the region and cried out to him, saying, have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely demon-possessed. Y'all, this is remarkable. Why is it remarkable? She's a Gentile. Hope you can see this map. Yeah, so Jesus has been going back and forth in Galilee, right there in all that area, back and forth all around. This is all Jewish territory. But in this case, he travels up to, again, I hope you can see that, yes, up to Tyre and Sidon. That is getting outside. Notice where it says Galilee. That's the territory of Israel. He has now moved into Phoenicia, which is Canaanite, Gentile territory. He's no longer he's no longer in the area of Jews talking to Jews. He's talking to Gentiles. And this Gentile comes to Jesus and not only says Lord, which means that she's submitting to him, but she even calls him Son of David. What does that tell you about this Canaanite woman? She knew the Scriptures, didn't she? She had a fear of God, didn't she? And that's amazing. So that's why I want you to see this. Then he answered her not a word. Wow. How rude, Jesus. Well, hold on. And his disciples came and urged him, say, send her away, for she cries out after us. They were kind of embarrassed too. You know, it's like this Gentile. Remember, Jews and Gentiles don't have anything to do with each other. I am sure that every one of Jesus' disciples, the hair on the back of their necks, and they were looking around constantly because they're in Gentile country. I mean, think about it. How do you feel if you go into a bad neighborhood? Right? Your awareness comes up and you start paying close attention to every little thing because you know you might be in danger, right? That's how they feel. And so they're like, send her away, send her away. We don't want any problems. And then he answered and says, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. What does Romans chapter 1 verse 16 say? Does anybody know? For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God unto salvation to the, there you go, the Jew first. This is part of God's plan. Now, she came and worshiped him. She's taking it now a step further. Not only does she call him Lord and Son of David, now she is bowing down and worshiping him, saying, Lord, help me. And notice Jesus, oh, wow. We've seen this before. We've seen people come and bow down and worship to Jesus, and then Jesus' response is, be healed, thy faithful son, thy faithful daughter, or what would you like for me to do for you, right? Most often when people bow to him, in this case asking to be healed, he responds. But what does Jesus do in this case? It is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to little dogs.
He's sort of offended. Should be. She should be offended by that statement. She
should be offended. Exactly right, because this is it's hard to define. Is Jesus really using a derogatory term? Yes and no. The Jews referred to the Gentiles as dogs. But notice her response. And she said, yes, Lord. What does that tell you about was she offended or not? In other words, she acknowledged what he just said. Yes, Lord. Yet even the little dogs eat the crumbs which fall from the master's table. Again, this woman knew the scriptures. She knew the Messiah was going to come to the Jews first. She knew that. And she says, but I know that there's crumbs that are available for me. And notice Jesus, so what was Jesus doing when he said that? Number one, when he didn't answer her, and then when he says that, what's he doing? He is testing her faith. He marvels at her. And Jesus answers and says, oh woman, what does he say? Great is your faith. Let it be as you desired. And her daughter was healed from that very hour.
Never give up.
Never give up. Never give up. It's kind of like that frog. You seen that picture of that frog that's the pelican's eating the frog and you see his arms coming around grabbing the neck. Never give up. All right? I think it's a beautiful, beautiful story. Her faith and her humility were rewarded. And so just an amazing, amazing story. So Jesus traveled some 35 to 50 miles by foot to go up here in this area and preach the gospel. Yes, John?
Can you just please go back to that previous map you had?
Yes.
That one? That was a great summary right there.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. This shows you a lot of the travels, and there's still even more than that, but that's a lot of the travels that Jesus had there in Galilee. All right, so now in verse 29, Jesus heals many people. This is the 7th section that Matthew gives us of Jesus healing. Jesus departed from there, skirted the Sea of Galilee, and went up on the mountain and sat down, and great multitudes came, having with them lame, blind, mute, maimed, and many others. And they laid them down at Jesus' feet, and he healed them. And they saw the mute speaking, the maimed made whole, the lame walking, the blind seeing, and what was the result? They glorified God. That's the purpose of miracles right there. So then, Jesus says to his disciples, says, I have compassion on the multitude because they have now continued with me for 3 days. For 3 days. Jesus has been nonstop healing these people, teaching these people, and personally dealing with them. And he says, and they have nothing to eat, and I do not want to send them away hungry. Again, there's compassion, lest they faint on the way. Then his disciples said to him, where could we get enough bread in the wilderness to fill such a great multitude? I don't know if y'all have ever been shopping out in the middle of the desert, but ain't a whole lot to pick from out there, is there? And so they're saying, we don't know what to do. And so Jesus says, well, how much do you have? How many loaves do you have? And they say, we have 7 and a few little fish. So Jesus commanded the multitudes to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves of fish and gave thanks. Now that's significant because remember what we showed back when it showed the disciples all gathered around Jesus, and Jesus got in a boat, or Jesus went up on a mountain and sat down, and all the people were standing. Well, here he's telling the people to sit down. So now, sit down. We're going to have this meal. So he gave thanks to the disciples, so they ate and were filled. They took up 7 baskets full of fragments that were left, and those that ate were 4,000 men, besides women and children. He sent away the multitude and got in the boat and came to the region of Magdala. So the disciples, whenever they said, where are we going to get enough bread? My first thought is like, did y'all not learn the first time we did this? Is this deja vu? Aren't we doing this all over again? I mean, but look at Jesus' patience. What do you have? Right? And yet, once again, and notice, different place, different number of people, different scenario, everything about this is different. This is not the same thing as the 5,000. So he's done this 5,000 men, by the way, which means there's even more people would have been there. Now there's 4,000. So this is 2 different occasions. And as far as we know, Jesus may have done it more than that. So it's fascinating that we see this miracle that takes place. All right, chapter 16, we get into some more confrontations with the Jews. And this time, I want you to notice something very interesting. Somebody read verse 1.
The Pharisees also with the Sadducees came and tempting desired him that he would show them a sign from heaven.
Okay, so first we had the scribes and the Pharisees, which is very common for those to be together. But now we have the Pharisees and the who? Sadducees. I don't know how much you know about the Jewish sects, but they were completely opposed to one another. So the Pharisees, they have their religious teachings, and so do the Sadducees. The Pharisees, kind of more of a middle, upper class type person, whereas the Sadducees were very wealthy. The Sadducees did not believe in the afterlife or in the resurrection. They did not believe in angels and other things, and you see that whenever Paul uses that in Acts chapter 22, when he realizes, oh, I got a whole room full of Sadducees and Pharisees. It is the same thing as if we had a whole room full of Republicans and Democrats, and all you got to say is, Trump. And boy, what happened? Right? And what he did is he incited the crowd in order to get them excited. That's in Acts chapter 22. So here, we got 2 groups of people who are opposed to one another. They don't agree. They're like Republicans and Democrats, but they're in the religious world. And they're working together for one purpose. What is that purpose? They're trying to trap him. Test him is the word that the New King James, and I think you said, what was it, yours, Mike, said that they might tempt him. Is that what verse 1 says? They're tempting him. And so they're asking for a sign. Now, here's a simple question. Is this the first time that they've ever come to him asking for a sign? No. They've already asked for a sign. It's like, How many signs do you want? How many signs do you need? But notice this time they say, show us a sign from heaven. Before they just asked for a sign. Now they want to know a sign from heaven. That's because they believe the forces of evil have no power in the heavens. Is that true or not? Do the forces of evil have power in the heavens? Think about that. Book of Job, Revelation chapter 12. The answer is yes. How do you think Satan wound up where he is? There were forces of evil there that caused him to fall. Now, God's in control, but in the spiritual world, in the heavens, there are forces of evil. The Sadducees did not believe that. So they're asking him to show a sign from heaven. Notice what Jesus says. When it's evening, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, it will be foul weather today, for the sky is red and threatening. He uses a word again. What does he call them? Hypocrites. You know how to discern the face of the sky, but you cannot discern the sign of the times. In other words, you can so accurately predict the weather. You can look at something and predict the weather, but you can't look at the signs. You can't look at all of the fulfilled prophecy and everything that I've been doing, if I could put words in Jesus' mouth here, that I've been doing, and you can't recognize that. He says, a wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign shall be given except the sign of the prophet Jonah. And he left them and departed. In other words, why should I give you a sign? You can't even recognize what's right in front of your eyes. So therefore, your sign is what's already in the scriptures, the prophet Jonah. What was it about the prophet Jonah? He didn't show a sign. He preached that they should repent, and the people repented. And that's what Jesus is saying.
He was resurrected from the fish after 3 days. I think he's saying the resurrection is going to be the ultimate sign. And that's my opinion.
I think that's a good point. Now, the Ninevites did not see that resurrection, but the Jews would certainly know about that resurrection. And like I said a minute ago, the Sadducees don't believe it. That's a great point, Jack. John?
You know, the Pharisees and the Sadducees were completely against one another. I loved your analogy about the Republicans and Democrats. And both of those, they're just trying to stay in power.
Yes.
And so that's really all both of these.
Trying to stay in power.
There was another time when the Pharisees and the Herodians were together, but those were kind of as well. So you got these people who are just acting to play a part so they can maintain their power.
Yes.
What they're trying to do is maintain their power through the whole thing. That's the only thing they have in common. And so now he says to them, listen, you can define something that's outside of your realm, which you would call weather, right? But here's something that's right in front of you, which is your, as you know, the old word bailiwick. This is what you're good at. And you can't even tell what this is.
Yeah.
You're not getting anything because you're just a hypocrite. A hypocrite is an actor. And really what they're doing is he's saying, you're just plain stupid.
Yeah.
Not plain, P-L-A-I-N, just plain, but P-L-A-Y-I-N-G. You're just acting like you don't know. But the truth is you're a hypocrite because you do know. And the things you should
Oh, yeah.
then you should be better at that than this.
I like that. Because they do know. They do. In fact, we're going to see that later, because they even say in John chapter 11, everybody's going to go to this man. If we don't stop this man, everybody's going to believe in him. What does that mean? We're going to lose power. They're not going to follow us anymore. Great point. Both great points, Jack and John. Thank you all. All right, so he goes on, and his disciples came to the other side, and they had forgotten to take bread. Boy, they sure have a problem with bread, don't they? Well, Jesus always uses things to teach a lesson. So Jesus said, take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. I'm sure that Jesus did this all the time. He would just drop these little truth bombs here and there. Just drop these little truth bombs. And it just, then the disciples are like, whoa, 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 whoa. This is the best part of it, is watch what happens. Watch what they do. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, is it because we have taken no bread? This is good. This is a good sign. It means, okay, they've come to realize that when Jesus says something, it probably has a spiritual meaning. It probably has something to do with the kingdom. So now they're thinking, oh, what does this mean? Remember, they're always asking, what does this mean? And so they're trying to reason with it. And Jesus becomes aware of it. He sees them reasoning. And he says, oh, you have little faith. Why do you reason among yourselves because you have brought no bread? Do you not yet understand? All right, so that's the whole point. He's wanting them to understand. Or remember the 5 loaves of the 5,000, how many baskets you took up, nor the 7 loaves of the 4,000, how many large baskets you took up. Put a pen down there right quick. That's why I say those are 2 separate things. Jesus himself mentions 2 separate occasions. The reason I bring that up is because some people want to say that they're the same occasion, the 5,000 or 4,000. I don't know why they say that, but that's what they say. They're kind of like Pharisees and scribes, right? How is it you do not understand that I do not speak to you concerning bread, but beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees? Then they understood that he did not tell them to beware of the leaven. He's not actually talking about actual leaven. He's talking about the doctrine of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. He's using a metaphor, an analogy. And this is another point that I want to bring out that we talked about kingdom leaders is analogies or metaphors. Figures of speech can sometimes have more than one meaning. So over and over I keep reading as I'm doing my studies. I do my studies and then I like to kind of look at different commentaries just to see, what other people are saying. And over I keep finding these commentaries saying that leaven always represents corruption. No, it doesn't. Because you remember what Jesus said back in chapter 13, verse 33, that the kingdom of God is like leaven. It spreads. So it's not always corruption. You're telling me the kingdom of God is corruption? So it's a good lesson in interpretation, which is exactly what's going on right here. These men are trying to interpret what it is Jesus is saying, and he gives them the plain teaching that he's talking about how their doctrines pervade everything. That's what leaven does. Once you get a little bit of yeast, a little bit of leaven in the dough, it just spreads throughout the whole thing. And that's what he's saying. And that's what false teaching does, by the way. It starts out small, and it teaches us we got to be careful with little things. Because little things can turn into big things and spread throughout an entire society, an entire congregation. And the next thing you know, you've got a bunch of, what's he call the scribes and Pharisees? Hypocrites. It's a great lesson right there we got to be careful with. All right, real quick, we got to do this next section real fast, but I think most people understand it. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? You need to understand, this is where regional context comes into play. Caesarea Philippi is an area that has what's called a pantheon. It's an area where they have many gods. There's all these little temples. There's this rock face that has all these gods in it and everything. So these multiple gods, everything you can think of, Zeus, Apollo, and you name it. And so that's where he says, who do people say I am? With that in the background, a lot of people believe these are God. Who do people say I am? That's the regional context. So they say, some say John the Baptist, some Elijah, some Jeremiah, and one of the prophets. Now, remember, Herod thought that Jesus was John the Baptist resurrected. You have others who thought that this was Elijah. And then Jeremiah is a teaching that comes from the Apocrypha, which is a teaching that is not inspired, but is some of the writings that they had at that time. And it talks about in Maccabees, it talks about that the Messiah is going to rise up. He's going to be a military leader. So they're trying to figure out, that's who people say you are, Jesus. But notice what Jesus says. But who do you say I am? You need to underline that line, underline that verse, and you need to ask yourself that question. Who do you say Jesus is? I know a lot of theologians who can tell me all kinds of stuff about Jesus, but then I always want to ask them the question, who do you say Jesus is? Who's Jesus to you? And I want you to notice what Simon Peter says. Simon Peter says, you are the Messiah. Now the Greek word for that is Christos. That's why your Bible says Christ. You are the Christ. You are the Messiah, the Christ. And then he takes it one step further. Not only are you the promised one, the coming one, but you are the Son of God. So remember back earlier they were trying to figure out what Jesus says. This is great. This shows you that Peter has been paying attention. Peter has put what he's seeing into his faith, and he has come to the realization this really is the Son of God. Now notice what Jesus says. That's the context. Here you have these gods, and he asks, who do people say I am? Who do you say I am? Peter says, you are the Son of God. Now notice, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you. Revealed what? That he's the Son of God. There it is. But my Father in heaven. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this, just take out the word rock, and on this I will build my church. It makes the whole thing make a whole lot more sense. So what is the rock that he is going to build his church upon? The fact that he is the Son of God. What you just said, Peter, that very fact right there. Just take the word rock and change it to the word fact, if that helps you. Upon that fact, Peter, I'm going to build my church. And he goes on to say, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it, and I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And so he's saying that I'm going to build my church. It's singular. I could preach on this for about an hour right here because there's so much about the church. You've heard me preach about this, talk about this. It's singular. It is his church. It is not the Catholic Church. Peter is not the first pope. This is not their verse to use that on, saying the rock and all that stuff. There's a singular church. And then he says, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. In other words, through inspiration, what God has already established, you're going to reveal and you're going to continue explaining that. All right, let's continue. Verse 21. From that time Jesus began to show his disciples he must go to Jerusalem, suffer many things from the elders, chief priests, and scribes, and be killed and raised the third day. They have now grown to the point that they're seeing the big picture. They're starting to see it. They're starting to put it together. So from that point on, Jesus says, okay, now let me let you in on the biggest part of the secret. I'm going to die. I'm going to die, but I'm going to be raised the third day. They don't get it. They don't understand it. We see that in Acts chapter 1, verse 6, because they say, Lord, are you now going to establish your kingdom? So they still don't quite put it all together, but Jesus is revealing that to them. He's telling them. And then notice, here Peter just says, you are the Son of God. Now he takes him aside and begins to rebuke him, saying, far be it from you, Lord, that shall not happen to you. What's wrong with Peter? Peter is saying, essentially, we're not going to let that happen. We're not going to let you get killed. We're going to stand beside you, and we're going to make this, we're going to protect you. Real quick, Paul.
How much of that misunderstanding or lack of understanding is because they were aware of what was written in Matthew?
Yeah.
He's a military, how can he die?
Yeah.
Military leader's going to win and conquer and establish a kingdom.
Good point. Good point. So he's still looking at it from a worldly point of view. But Jesus says to Peter, get behind me, Satan. Now, who is Satan to God? It's God's enemy, right? He just called Peter an enemy. That's because if you're not in God's plan, you're an enemy of God. You are an offense to me. You're not mindful of the things of God, but the things of men. Jesus knows what his purpose is, and nothing's going to stop God from fulfilling that purpose. And exactly what you just said, Paul, Peter, you're thinking still about a physical kingdom. That is not what I want. He just got through saying, I'm going to give you the keys to the kingdom. Peter probably went, woohoo! Thinking physical. I'm going to be remember, that's been a discussion among them. Who's going to be at your right hand? Who's going to be the number one when you come in your kingdom? And Peter just went, Right? And so that's why, we're not going to let this happen, Lord. You're going to live. Now, Jesus takes all that. We got just enough time to finish up here. He says, if anyone does, I want you to notice there's 4 things that are required to be a disciple. Number 1, if anyone desires, you got to have the desire to come after me. Number 2, let him deny himself. You need to stop thinking about yourself and start letting Jesus on the throne of your heart. Take up your cross. What does a cross represent? Hardship, suffering, even death. And follow me. So you have to have a conscious decision. You have to turn from worldly ways. You have to be intentionally purposeful in your faith. And then you need to be obedient to his instruction until death. Does that not sound like the gospel plan right there? That's what it means, to count the cost of discipleship. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what profits it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? And what will a man give in exchange for his soul? For the Son of Man will come in the glory of his Father and his angels, and he will reward each according to his works. Surely I say, there are some standing here who shall not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. And indeed, from that moment forward, when the kingdom does finally come and Peter does finally use those keys, somebody's died. Judas Iscariot. And Jesus. That's right. And Jesus. All right. That is our bell. We're going to take a break and prepare for our worship service. Thank you for your attention.